This is going to be a remake of a response video I did about a week ago. After receiving feedback for that video and going over my script again a couple of times, I really wasn't happy with how I handled my response, and because of this, I decided I'd just remake the entire thing. So if you've already seen the previous video, then this is going to be more of the same, but with certain sections reworded and a lot more examples than I had the first time around. But with that out of the way, I'll now get into my response. Recently, I've been watching some videos about the anime Sword Art Online. Since I'm currently working on a video where I'm criticizing the show in depth, it made me curious about exactly which arguments were being made in the anime's defense. Which brings me to a YouTuber named Pilgrims Pass, who posted a video titled Sword Art Online Had a Point, Bro. It's a video that I took a lot of issues with, so I decided I'd make a response in order to explain why. Similarly to my other responses, I'll occasionally skip over parts of the video where I don't really have anything to add. This includes any sections about Alicization since I haven't made it that far in the anime. But considering that these sections only make up a small part of Pilgrim's video, I still feel comfortable with responding to most of it. But if you want to watch these sections for yourself, then I'll be linking the video in the description below.
The hate that Sword Art Online has gotten is one of the most mind-boggling things I've seen from the anime community.
Really? I think it's pretty easy to understand why people don't like the show, whether it's the rushed pacing, poorly developed characters, or various plot holes when it comes to the narrative. Based on the first season and what I watched of the second, the show suffers from a lot of poor writing, so personally I don't have trouble understanding why it's so hated.
But as we live in a time where Lex Friedman goes all, "Do you believe we're in a simulation? Actually, Lex, your face is a simulation. You're trapped in a reality I control with my cyber jujitsu. Maybe now I can finally find love." This all actually brings some of the themes of SAO to the forefront of very pressing discussions these days. When it comes to metaverses, virtual reality, living in cyberspace, losing touch with the actual physical world, and crafting our own social media identities, etc. It's the largest franchise that specifically talks about these current issues in depth, more than anything else I've seen in the mainstream.
SAO does not explore any of these topics in depth. At best, it pays lip service to these ideas without ever going beyond the surface level. But I'll wait until Pilgrim actually goes into the topic before I explain why I disagree.
The Matrix is actually not about big tech taking over our lives with artificial realities and an existential confusion of living too much in the digital space. It's about Plato's allegory of the cave, or gender dysphoria, one of those two. Books like Snow Crash and Neuromancer are much more profound and sophisticated than SAO, of course, but they're more highbrow books, consumed by a very specific type of audience, whereas SAO brings these important reflections to a wider and younger audience, even if it's full of silly anime shenanigans.
I guess I could agree that SAO introduces these ideas to a younger audience. I just take issue with you saying that any of them are explored in depth.
This isn't to say that I don't understand the criticisms people have for the show. They're absolutely valid criticisms.
So you don't understand the hate for SAO, but you do understand the criticisms that explain people's hate? I'm sorry, but that doesn't make much sense to me. Even if you disagree about the extent of these issues, the fact that you understand them means that it shouldn't be that hard to understand the hate.
I even enlisted them on screen. But what actually confounds me is that aren't these issues common in anime in general? I mean, wasn't all this in the weeb social contract we had to sign before engaging with the medium?
Pilgrim doesn't really elaborate on how these bullet points are issues. While things like contrivances and annoying arcs are obviously criticisms, I feel like the other ones require context in order to determine if they're issues or not. But even then, this whole thing about other anime also having the same issues is an excuse, not an argument. There are plenty of anime out there that don't contain any of these tropes, and the fact that they do exist in a lot of other anime doesn't make them above criticism.
I mean, this is why everyone calls weebs degenerates, even if there's all the same BS in widely acclaimed shows like Game of Thrones. But it's, the golden age of television when it happens there.
I genuinely have no idea what you're talking about. In what way is the weird shit in SAO comparable to Game of Thrones? Admittedly, I haven't made it that far in this story and I'm mostly going off of secondhand knowledge, but literally the only things I can find on this list are incest and abuse. Also, you still have yet to explain how any of these things are issues.
The reason SAO didn't bother me is because I had already seen all of this in other anime. many of which are actually more weird and problematic, but still widely loved and nobody complains about them. Incest. It's much worse than Chivalry of a Failed Knight, and they're actual siblings on that show, not cousins. Weird tentacle stuff. This scene didn't go too far. It pretty much stops there, and this scene illustrates an important danger of virtual reality, where the most depraved garbage in the human psyche can be manifested onto people, creating new avenues of abuse. Weird, pervy abuse implications. Again, powerful rich people already get away with a lot, and now they're getting the power to create entire realities that we are going to have to inhabit and play by their rules. To me, SAO was clever to talk about this in a way that played out in the princess in the castle archetype from our fairy tales. It's an interesting way to show virtual reality making human fantasies come to life, even dark ones.
Pilgrim doesn't elaborate on how the fairy dance arc explores any of these ideas. I thought that the point of this video was to talk about how SAO explores relevant topics in depth, but all Pilgrim has done is draw these connections without any explanation.
Also, the chair food fetish scene in Attack on Titan was way worse, but that was done to an adult man, so I guess it disturbs people less than a pretty typical Rapunzel plot, I guess.
Okay, first off. Second off, are you implying that these people are less bothered by abuse/torture when it's directed towards a man? I feel like you probably shouldn't be making accusations like that when you haven't even proven these scenes are comparable.
Harem BS. Okay, it's not a real harem anime, and Mushoku Tensei is an actual harem anime and everyone really loves that one, so I don't get it. And also Mushoku Tensei is more disturbing than SAO. Borderline illegal, actually.
Not a great choice for a non-controversial anime. Mushoku Tensei is a pretty divisive show from what I've seen, with a lot of people being especially critical of its harem aspect. Just because the show has a large fan base doesn't mean that it isn't controversial. Also,
as for complaints number 5 to 7, I say again, do you even anime, bro? This stuff is pretty much ubiquitous in all of them.
Once again, this is a massive overgeneralization. It would be one thing if you were just saying that these are common tropes, but to say that they can be found in pretty much every anime is absurd.
But I guess the one criticism of the show that I kind of agree with is how ridiculous it was for Kirito to summon some major main character energy and go all, "I'm hacking the mainframe!" to save his digital daughter. Yeah, that scene is a little iffy because that totally wouldn't have happened if Kayaba was using NordVPN, this video's sponsor.
The first time I watched this video, this moment honestly gave me whiplash. I was actually agreeing with Pilgrim on something and was wondering if he was going to elaborate on it, only for it to be the setup of a NordVPN ad. I'm going to skip over this next minute because it's literally just jokes and Pilgrim talking about why this VPN is good. Considering that my main focus is on Pilgrim's arguments, I don't really have anything to talk about here.
When you go deeper into why people hate the show, you realize the true reason is because every person has a different threshold of suspension of disbelief and what they cannot tolerate. And SAO ends up making too many choices, and I would even say somewhat bold decisions, that end up losing people eventually by taking things in an unexpected direction a lot of the times. That's why everyone has a different point where they just had too much of the bullcrap and abandoned the show, including me, by the way.
I don't disagree that everyone has a different tolerance in terms of how much they can suspend disbelief, but that can also apply to literally any piece of fiction, so I don't really see the point in mentioning it here. You also should have elaborated on these bold decisions that SEO makes, because personally I struggle to think of any real risks that the writers took.
But to me, the first 3 seasons were still pretty good, since SAO is a series of isolated narrative arcs from season to season, each one being its own isolated story, so it becomes possible to enjoy each independently, especially the first season.
While I haven't seen the show past episode 9 of Phantom Bullet, I struggle to think of any episode that I would call remotely good. Even the Aincrad Arc, which is widely considered the best, is riddled with problems. One of the most prevalent examples of this is the incredibly rushed pacing, which causes the show to gloss over a lot of important world building and game mechanics. You get mentions of random details such as the in-game prison in episode 4 or the conflict over resources in episode 2. Both of these are plot points that should have massive ramifications on the setting, yet we never really get the specifics, and they are more or less ignored for the rest of the arc. Considering that game mechanics are a fundamental part of how SEO creates conflict, I consider this to be one of the biggest issues with the narrative.
It reveals a world where a new incredibly immersive multiplayer virtual reality game is launched, a full-on gigantic world of swords and monsters, where one can experience an adventure. But then, right as the game starts, the creator of this virtual reality appears and reveals that he trapped them all in a world of his design, where they must play by his rules or die. And in this scenario, the cast of characters that we got were serviceable.
That is indeed the premise of the Aincrad arc, but I strongly disagree about the cast being serviceable. SEO's characters are either two-dimensional or receive rushed development due to the terrible pacing of the first arc. You've got characters like Asuna, who undergoes an off-screen transformation from a shy introvert into a confident leader. And then you have characters like Liz or Silica, who receive minimal characterization in their introductory episodes, fall in love with Kirito, and then become background characters who don't really add anything to the rest of the arc. Once again, I just wish that Pilgrim would substantiate this claim, because on its own it doesn't give me much to work with.
Kirito is accused of being a Mary Sue, and I can see why, but when he's not hacking the mainframe, his overpowered status is believable. I mean, he's a loner Asian kid in a video game. Have you met these little bastards online? They'll destroy you in gameplay. If anything, SAO has the perfect setup to make a lonely nerdy kid an absolute badass in a believable way.
This comparison doesn't really work due to the context of SAO's story. It would be one thing if Kirito was really good at a video game that most people played casually, but considering that SAO is now a matter of life or death, people are going to be taking it way more seriously than they would a regular video game. Yet Kirito still seems to be at a much higher level than almost any player he comes across.
You do have amazingly proficient gamers at around that age, while a lot of the adult characters had actual social lives and jobs, so it makes sense that Kirito is of the demographic to stand out in this situation.
Even if Kirito had the benefit of past experience, that doesn't explain why there's such a large power gap when almost every player is equally involved in this game.
And him being a beta tester, and knowing where the best locations to farm XP are, and going off alone to grind, when everyone else is moping about how they're going to die, was actually interesting. Not to mention his background as a kendo practitioner. He's perfectly positioned to just dominate in this world. It's a lot less contrived than vague magical destinies that most isekai protagonists have, some of which literally makes them invincible and unable to die. And we don't complain about that. In fact, we love it.
I have a few issues with this point. While Kirito does have a decent amount of beta test knowledge, we don't know exactly how reliable it would be. Considering that the first floor boss was in a different location and had different weapons from the beta, it feels safe to say that this information won't be 100% reliable. Also, Kirito isn't the only player who dedicates his time to grinding, as we see plenty of players who are all dedicated to progressing this game, such as the Aincrad Liberation Front or the Knights of the Blood Oath. And while there would be certain circumstances where kendo training would be useful, it's also a martial art that's based around one-on-one sword fighting, so I don't feel like it would be as helpful when you're fighting massive creatures who don't necessarily fight like humans do. I'd say that this point has a bit more validity than the other two, but it still doesn't feel like enough to justify Kirito's power level.
Kirito is a bit of a tragic character. Where in the real world he's more awkward, weak, and withdrawn, but in the death game he absolutely thrives. And when it's over, he feels this guilty, melancholy feeling because deep down, he loved that horrible situation. At least he felt some purpose there, or he felt more alive, I guess.
I'd say that this is a fine summation of Kirito's character, but it doesn't explain exactly how he's a tragic one. Just because some bad things happen to Kirito doesn't make his story a tragedy.
I do think that there is a underappreciated complexity to Kirito, one common in young men these days, which is why he was so popular a character when the anime first came out.
I'm sorry, but how is this aspect of Kirito's character common? I kind of get the part about being withdrawn from society, but I wouldn't necessarily call that a complexity. And if you're talking about the aspect of being trapped in a video game while enjoying it deep down, then I don't think that there's a single person who can relate to that as of now.
And the harem trope that many complain about is pretty ubiquitous these days, but in SAO, they're not really a harem. I know some people say that that's just a fake out there, it's actually a harem anime, but it pretends not to be, but no, that's not a harem. Those girls are just groupies around him, and they're groupies that he doesn't respond to. It's not a harem!
Based on what I watched, I still think it counts as a harem when almost every named female character shows romantic interest in Kirito. Silica, Liz, and Suguha clearly have a crush on him, and in Fairy Dance we see Alicia and Sakuya flirt with him. So unless I'm forgetting someone, that only leaves Sachi, Rosalia, and Yoko.
Asuna is best girl, and it's his one and only, and it surprised me how they just got married in the first season. I mean, they have a full romance arc, you know? Boy meets girl, boy likes girl, they confess their feelings, then they get married, adopt an AI daughter. I really like that.
I mean, it's fine if you like their relationship, but to say that they have a full romance arc feels like a stretch due to how rushed it is. We get this whole conflict between them at the beginning of episode 5, where they disagree on the morality of killing NPCs along with how much effort they should put into beating this game. You'd think that the show would elaborate on this conflict, yet it isn't mentioned again after episode 5, and the two of them are depicted as a completely happy couple.
And it was really wholesome. The type of a wholesome relationship you don't really see in anime. There were no love games, no love triangle, just a boy and a girl finding real love in a dark place and being the strength of one another. I really like that.
Okay, now I'm convinced that Pilgrim has barely seen any anime. There are so many shows out there with wholesome romantic relationships, so to say that SAO is one of the only ones is ridiculous.
People insist that it's still just a harem anime for mere wish fulfillment, so that sweaty, lonely nerds can feel like they too can have a bunch of girls pining over them. And yeah, I guess there's an element of that.
But I thought that there was no harem element in the show. Why are you saying otherwise all of a sudden?
But to be honest, the groupies of girls around him made a lot of sense. People act like it's unbelievable nonsense. Because Kirito doesn't have a personality, but do you even the female mind, bro? Aren't famous sports stars and celebrities surrounded by ladies? And when it comes to no personality, what about Timothée Chalamet and his one facial expression? And he still has legions of fangirls.
So your only counter-argument for Kirito having fans is that other shallow people have fans? Not only are you calling Kirito shallow, but you're making it seem like the female characters only like him for surface-level reasons rather than any aspect of his personality. Somehow you're making the show you're defending seem even worse.
Wouldn't it be even more so for the best player in a death game, who's an essential part of beating all the levels and literally saving everyone's lives? Kirito is a top-notch real warrior in this context. And what, do you think guys like that are incels?
I've literally never seen anyone argue that Kirito is an incel. I don't even know who you're arguing against.
And that's the appeal of Kirito. What if you were put in a context where all those hours you pissed away playing video games, instead of being productive, actually ended up turning you into a badass that every girl desired?
I thought that you were trying to explain why Kirito is a good character, but all this point seems to be doing is explaining why he's a popular one.
Kirito was a lonely, insecure guy in the real world, but what made him awkward out there made him awesome in here. And he knows that, which is why I like that Kirito was a bit of a confident douche at times. I assumed he was going to be one of those anime beta boys. That's why they call him a beta tester. Because honestly, that's kind of how he looks, you know, fragile and a bit effeminate. But no, which was yet another pleasant surprise. When that Smith girl's being all snarky, he gets snarky back, and then she falls in love. When people try to control him, he doesn't play by their rules, and he does the effort to earn that confidence, even if it happened off screen.
The fact that we don't see Kirito work towards becoming stronger is why his feats are unearned narratively. There are multiple scenes where Kirito pulls out an extremely powerful ability he gained off screen, such as the regenerating health in episode 4, his superhuman agility in episode 6, or his dual-wielding ability in episode 9. And you can't just make the excuse that these important scenes happened off screen, because by that logic you could excuse almost any writing flaw.
And despite many of the complaints, I don't think that he's a Mary Sue exactly. I mean, if you ignore the "I'm hacking the mainframe!" Since he does struggle, he does need help at times, and he doesn't defeat the bad guy by brute force and unlimited power, which is a staple of Mary Sue's.
There are multiple occasions where Kirito beats an enemy by being stronger or having some overpowered ability, including the Santa Claus boss fight in episode 3 or the Player Killer Guild in episode 4. Even the boss fight in episode 9 sort of falls under this, because while the boss's health was whittled down by other players, it was Kirito who single-handedly rescued the group from a dire situation. There may be moments where Kirito struggles or needs help from other people, but there are still plenty of scenes where he's able to defeat a boss or other players on his own.
In fact, he wasn't strong enough to beat the game conventionally at all. No one was.
And at the exact moment where he's faced with a challenge too great, he's instantly given an easy way out via his duel with Kayaba. Even if he isn't capable of defeating literally any enemy, the story still finds a way to make him come out on top, which sounds a lot like a Mary Sue to me.
Another thing that surprised me, they were halfway up the ginormous castle, only beating half of the levels before they almost all died. And I remember sitting there thinking, how the heck are they going to get out of this? But then he outsmarts the bad guy. He notices a mistake in the system, and he wins by not playing the game by the bad guy's rules, but on his own terms.
I feel like you're giving Kirito way too much credit here. He didn't really outsmart Kayaba as much as he made a very large assumption that just happened to be correct. It's understandable that Kirito would be suspicious of Kayaba winning their last duel, and the fact that he doesn't seem that exhausted. But considering that he might kill an innocent person if he's wrong, then it doesn't feel like he has nearly enough information to justify this risk. But it also doesn't make sense that Kayaba would make it this easy for people to see through his deception. Not only did he not consider how he doesn't look that tired, but he made it so anyone who hits him gets an immortal object notification. Regardless of how unlikely that occurrence is, why would Kayaba even take the risk when he could just turn it off? Overall, this is an extremely contrived scene, and I find the way Pilgrim frames it to be very inaccurate.
And when his wife sacrifices herself and dies, I legit gasped. I was shocked, flabbergasted, stupefied when that happened.
So we're just going to ignore how she broke out of paralysis that was inflicted upon her by the Game Master. Good to know.
But then, it was a fake-out death, and she's still alive. Of course she is. But you know what? I like that. Because I like Asuna. I'm glad she was still around. And it kinda makes sense that Kayaba didn't kill her. He's a monster, and a terrible piece of trash, but he's still a human being, and he formed a personal connection with her as her mentor.
Once again, you're doing the writer's job for them. We don't get any scenes that would indicate this special attachment to Asuna. Kayaba's likely gained many connections during his time in SAO, but that doesn't necessarily mean he'd show any of them mercy. You can't just say that they're human in order to justify any inconsistencies.
As for the second season, it wasn't as good, but I liked it. Locking up Asuna as a Rapunzel figure was actually a good choice for the fairy tale vibe they were going for. It's okay if a female character is in distress from time to time. Asuna is still a strong lady, all things considered.
Asuna being in distress isn't inherently the problem, it's that we get nothing from her character besides getting abused by Sugo. I also have no idea how you justify Asuna being a strong person in this situation, but considering that you aren't backing this up with evidence, I don't really have anything to go on.
And the incest arc, well, Kirito's cousin falls in love with him, and it's awkward, but it's a legitimate literary trope that provides genuine character drama moments. I mean, it's in Shakespeare and Greek tragedies and stuff for a reason. And it helps that it was one-sided, and that Kirito, though kind, didn't seem to be entertaining his cousin's weirdness, which makes it more of a genuine tragedy and not the writer's barely veiled fetish. But maybe it is, I don't know. I'm just saying my impressions of the show.
I agree that's a legitimate trope, but the inclusion of incest alone doesn't make a story more interesting, and once again, you provide no elaboration on how this is a genuine tragedy.
The third season with the Game Gun arc was definitely weaker. Again, each season did keep getting worse, but it had cool moments, and I appreciate that they tried something different.
I haven't seen the last few episodes of Gun Gale, but based on what I watched, it was just as stupid as the arcs that came before. Whether it's Kirito's instant mastery of a VR game he's never played, the really surface level theme about differences between real and virtual worlds, or the fact that VR is still extremely popular despite there being 2 cases of people getting trapped in VR games. And I don't think the argument that the writers tried something different is a particularly strong one, especially when considering how nonsensical those episodes were.
SAO, both as an in-universe game and as an anime, does a great job at capturing the appeal of the blade, of facing challenges up close and personal, and the respect humans instinctively have for that. We want the blade to still be a viable weapon. We mourn the fact that technology has made it obsolete, which is why we humans fantasize about technology somehow making it viable in a modern context again.
Once again, could you provide any evidence for this? Because I feel like you failed to explain exactly how this is a concept explored by SAO.
The first thing humanity does with super advanced modern sci-fi tech is use it to go back to an idealized Middle Ages, and I love it. With the recent AI craze, one of the first applications of large language models in virtual reality we saw was this.
I wanted to experiment a bit with how to use ChatGPT-driven NPCs, especially in virtual reality.
I am an artificial intelligence manifesting as an old Christian monk. Remember to trust in the Lord, for he is the rock that we can rely on.
Pilgrim doesn't give enough context for this example to have any substance. He just flashes this random clip about AI-generated NPCs as if that somehow proves SAO's depictions of VR is currently relevant.
Ironically, the mastery of the material world through technology makes us more spiritual, because spirituality is the belief that the abstract is more real than the material. And when we start making virtual worlds through abstract numbers and computational code, we start wondering if our world was made the same way.
Once again, I don't have any issue with the idea, it's just that Pilgrim isn't explaining how SAO explores it.
Which is why the simulation hypothesis is so popular now. As the ability to create entire worlds manifests itself, we realize that we may indeed be made in the image of God, but it makes some people driven mad by the need to play God, which is what drove the villain Kayaba. SAO was his game, and he was the only real player, because it was designed for him to play as God. And to do that, he had to turn those who would be playing as swordsmen into real swordsmen fighting for their lives, so that he could watch over them and walk among them like a divine being. Kayaba makes it clear when he talks about his childhood obsessions of a castle in the sky, and how he wanted to make that a reality.
Once again, you're making this seem way deeper than it actually is. It's true that Kayaba is driven by a desire to play God, but the season never really explores his motives deeper than that. We learn of his desire to play God in episode 1, and how the concept of Aincrad was based on a dream he had in episode 14. But besides these two scenes, that's all we really get. It's a pretty surface level motivation that Pilgrim makes out to be so much deeper. And once again, this connection to real-world topics just isn't substantiated.
But in the end, he's a sham, and his failure makes everything unravel, and he loses to reality because Kirito, who entered the game to play at being a knight, was put in a circumstance by Kayaba that turned him into a real knight, who saved real damsels in distress from real danger, and who slayed real monstrous threats.
Similarly to the plot of SAO, Pilgrim is making Kirito's feats seem way more impressive than they actually are. Just because he has high stats and is good at a video game doesn't make him a warrior. While it does make him a valuable asset when there's life or death stakes, in the end it's still just a video game.
And the reality Kirito embodied defeated the false divinity of a little man who just wanted to play at being God.
Hopefully everyone who's watching this will now understand why I think this video is terrible. Whether it's the constant reliance on whataboutisms, unsubstantiated claims, or misrepresentations of the story in order to make it sound deeper. You're already fighting an uphill battle by trying to explain why SAO is good. But even then, Pilgrim's defenses were extremely weak, and I just want to make a video to explain why I took issue with them. But now that I'm finished with this response, I just want to thank everyone for watching. I really wasn't proud of how I handled my previous response and didn't want to just leave things as they were. And now that I've remade the video with more examples and reasoning, I'm a lot happier with how it turned out. But if you think that there was anything I got wrong about the video or SAO as a whole, then feel free to let me know. But anyways, that's about it. Thanks for watching.